particular, Dr. David Anderson and his wife Betty are here. Obviously, Dave had a huge impact on Brandt's life, but 40 years ago, Dave had a huge impact on mine. And Dave was the man more than any other person that God has used to influence me spiritually. And I'm honestly forever be grateful. He is also the president of a tremendous new school called Grace School of Theology that's here in the Houston Woodlands area. They're offering courses, and I tell you, it would be so worth your while to sign up for these courses. There's a couple of free ones that you can take just to see if you like it, but it's a tremendous opportunity here in the Houston area to get really solid theological foundation in a very practical kind of way. So anyway, Dave will be here afterwards, and if you'd like to know more, he'd be glad to talk to you. So one of the great reasons for becoming a grandfather is that it gets you back into a genre of literature that you had long ago left, or thought you had left. And you get to go back to the great children's stories that you read to your kids and find that they've never gone away. And who can remember some of those great books? Yes? No, names, sorry. No, we want specifics here.
Good Night Moon.
What is it?
Good Night Moon.
Good Night Moon, okay. What else?
Green Eggs and Ham.
Sweet, yeah, of course. Green Eggs and Ham, all Dr. Seuss. Who else?
Winnie the Pooh.
Sweet. You gotta have Winnie the Pooh in there. One more.
Velveteen Rabbit.
Oh my gosh, Velveteen Rabbit. Who can forget the Velveteen Rabbit? Or the Giving Tree. Have you ever seen the picture of the guy who wrote the Giving Tree? Seriously, he looks like Mr. T. I mean, he is a bad looking dude. And it's like, how did this guy write this particular book? Or Alexander and the Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. Another of the great classics. But I think maybe my favorite is one that just doesn't get the press it deserves. It's called Scuffy the Tugboat. Anybody ever read Scuffy the Tugboat? Probably not. It's great. It really should be a classic. And it revolves around the great story of Scuffy, who is a model tugboat. And of course, he has a young boy who takes care of him. And he starts out in the bathtub. And he's in the bathtub, he says to himself, wait a minute, I was made for greater things than this. And he tells the boy, and the boy agrees. And the boy takes him, I think, next to the swimming pool. And he gets in the swimming pool and moves along, but again he says, wait, I was made for greater things than this. And ultimately the story is he gets to different bodies of water. So I think he ends up in the ocean, maybe gets drowned, I'm not sure what it is. But the whole refrain of the thing is, I was made for greater things than this. And I want to suggest this evening that the story of Scuffy the Tugboat is the plight of mankind. Because the reality is, we are made for greater things than most of us are tapping into. And the reason this is true is that we were created in the image of God. And we're going to see in a moment that God hardwired us with certain longings, with certain desires. But beyond that, Ecclesiastes tells us that God has set eternity in the hearts of men. That you and I are born into this world with an eternal vacuum that's placed within. And other than the scripture, I don't think anybody put it better than what you have on your handout, and that is Thomas Carlyle, the Scottish philosopher, when he said this. Man's unhappiness, as I construe, comes of his greatness. It is because there is an infinite within him, which with all of his cunning, he cannot quite bury beneath the finite. That is an incredible statement. And that's completely what we're about tonight. Is simply trying to get an understanding of what that infinite is within us, and why it is in fact that man with all his cunning cannot quite bury it beneath the finite. The passage that I think speaks so directly to this is one of my favorites. And it's Isaiah 55, 1 and 2. And I'm just going to read it. You can read along if you want. Ho, Tommy, there you are there. Ho, everyone who thirsts, let him come to the waters. And you who have no money, come buy and eat. Yes, come buy wine and milk without money and without price. And I love this verse. Why do you spend money for what is not bread, and your wages for what does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me and eat what is good, And let your soul delight itself in abundance, or as some translations have, the richest fare. And so what I want to do is just make a couple of simple points off of this passage. You see them here at the bottom. And I'm going to start with simply point one, and it's this: that God has created us with God-sized longings and then rigged life so that nothing on earth can fully satisfy them. And what I want you to notice is, in this passage, he directs us towards two spiritual hungers or thirsts or realities that are really a picture of our spiritual life as typified in the physical world. So we have the issue of drinking and we have the issue of food, which takes us to the great issue of simply hunger and thirst. Now, remembering that God created the physical universe very carefully, and he constructed it in such a way that it serves as a huge book of illustrations for the spiritual world. That's why we need to be students of nature. That's why we need to be on the lookout. Because in the spiritual realm, God has gone to great length to demonstrate what he thinks of our souls and what he wants for them through nature. One of them is through this fascinating issue of hunger and thirst. So when God created man, he knew that man had to have energy. That man would not function if there was not energy flowing through his body. And when man began to run low on energy, God made sure that he placed a mechanism within man that would ensure that it would drive man to that place where he could get the energy renewed, and that was called hunger. Right, hunger. That's what you're trying to say. Hunger. Now, you don't have to, encourage people to be hungry. You don't have to exhort people to be hungry. It's part of the package. In fact, many times we would wish we weren't so hungry. But the fact is, we need that because it's the mechanism God placed within us to drive us to the place that would enable our bodies to be able to continue functioning. God also placed within us something we need desperately, and that is our body continually and desperately needs water. And when we're running low on water, God placed a mechanism within us to be sure that it would drive us to drink of the liquid, to drink of the water that our body so desperately needs. And that, of course, David, is called thirst. No. Wine. No, not wine. But here's the point. All of that is good. All of that is given by God. And I want to submit to you in exactly the same way, God created within our souls two gaping holes, if you will. Two raging, inextinguishable longings. So that when we are running low on a certain commodity that only God can provide, we're thirsty. When we're running low on God, he gave us something that drives us to him. When we're running low on another commodity that only God provides, he placed another mechanism within us, and it's called hunger. And as you go through the scriptures, you find this again and again, that God uses these God-given longings to drive us to him. David in Psalm 63, "Oh God, you are my God, early will I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh longs for you as in a dry and thirsty land where there's no water." The Beatitudes, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after God," or after righteousness, "for they, and only they, will be filled." And so what else has happened is that God has been very careful to be sure that this God-sized vacuum can only be filled by him. And nothing on earth can quite do the job that we wish it could. C.S. Lewis put it like this: "If I find in myself a desire that nothing on earth can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." It's so right. Another world, another God. So, the question is then, what is this hunger? What is this thirst? And I'm going to suggest here, first of all, in terms of thirst, we thirst for a love that cannot be lost or even diminished by our performance. We're going to talk about two longings here. And let me just say this. Secular psychology, I think, has done a very good job of identifying that we have these needs. Abraham Maslow, in his classic work Hierarchy of Needs, published in 1943, does a phenomenal job. The best, I think, that's out there in terms of identifying the needs of the soul. The problem is this: they didn't know how to go far enough. Because eternity is set in the hearts of man. And it's not just, as Maslow would put at the third level of relationship, it's not just that we want love, it's that we want a certain kind of love. And it's not just that we want self-esteem and self-actualization, it's that we want a certain kind of self-esteem, a certain kind of actualization. And I'm going to submit to you that if we ever really got in touch with how passionately and deeply we long for these things, it would unnerve us. That's why we don't go there. That's why it's frightening at some level to go that deep within and admit, oh, man, I do want it this bad. But I'm going to suggest three things about each of these categories in terms of love and hunger. So let me go back again to the issue of love. We thirst for a love that cannot be lost or even diminished by our performance. Maslow would say that the very first thing that once safety needs have been met, physiological needs have been met, the very first cry of the soul is, does anybody care? Does anybody love me for who I am? This is not an issue of being male or female. This is an issue of being human. And it's not an issue of weakness either. It's an issue of a God-placed passion and longing and yearning that we cannot shake free from no matter how much we would like to. And so let me suggest three things about this particular kind of love that we're longing for, that God created, that God placed within us. Number one, I want to suggest that it is a love that initiates pursuit. It initiates pursuit. What I mean by that is this: we all want to be stalked. We all want to be stalked. Is that right? I've talked to a number of women over the years who were stalked, and it was nothing but terrifying. And rightly so. Because the person who was stalking them only meant them harm, or was only there for their selfish interest. But I've talked to many other women who have said, I'm so glad that my husband stalked me, because now I'm married to him. And what they meant is this: as we were dating, I threw up roadblocks. As we were dating, I just wanted to see, would he keep coming? As we were dating, I wanted to see how real this was. And he kept coming, and he kept coming, and he kept coming. And I'm the luckiest woman on the face of the earth because he kept coming. And beloved, you and I long for love we don't have to ask for. Who wants to go up to somebody and say, would you love me? No. What we long for is a love that comes after us. And in the Bible, there's a term that has caused all kinds of controversy, and it's tragic. It's called election. And election is God stalking. It's his benevolent stalking. It's God coming after us. We love because he first loved us. God demonstrates his love towards us in that while we were still sinners, while we were running from him, he came after us. Second, this is a love, and I like to put it this way, that cares recklessly and passionately. That cares recklessly and passionately. We don't want a stoic, arm's length love. We don't want a high five, I love you. We want passion. We're created for passion. We're made in the image of God. God is a passionate individual. And we long to know that there is a passion in this love that's coming after us. And I like the idea, really, that there's almost an irrationality to that passion. In fact, Freud, who really disdained the idea of human romance and human love, could not escape this passion in his own heart, because we have a letter that he wrote to his fiancée before they got married, and in the letter he said this: when you come to me, little princess, see that you love me irrationally. And his point was, I don't want to have to worry about whether my performance is going to put you off. I want to know that you're coming after me, passionately, romancing me, loving me. Passion is part and parcel of being human. We long for it. And thirdly, we want to know that this love is utterly unconditional. that this love cannot be lost or even diminished by our performance. That on our best day, it's a white-hot 10, and on our worst day, it's a white-hot 10, and it's not going anywhere. Remember years ago, Billy Joel came up with a song that soon became played at almost every wedding, it seemed like. And the lyrics of the song went, "Don't go about changing. I love you just the way you are." And that grabbed at the hearts of people and said, "Oh, yes, that's what I want." My friends, that's from God. God's the one who put in us that longing, that vacuum, that yearning. And may I ask you a question this evening? Have you found a big enough love? Have you found a big enough love? Because God breathed life. He breathed life to be sure that no human being on the face of the earth could ever fill that vacuum. Not the best of spouses, not the best of friends, not the best of parents could ever reach that deep. We long for a love that we can go off duty. If you go to Israel, and I highly recommend you do, you go down to the south and probably spend a night in a hotel, and as we've done a couple of times, there's a swimming pool. It's pretty hot down there. You jump in the pool, you have a great time. But a couple hundred yards from there is another body of water. And this body of water you go into, and it's kind of warm, and you lay back on it, and you couldn't go under if you wanted to. It's like being on a warm rubber raft. It's called the Dead Sea. And I grant you that there's a lot of ways that this illustration about God's love in the Dead Sea break down. But it doesn't in this. And that is, in the swimming pool, you have to work to stay afloat at some level. But you come to the Dead Sea, and you throw all of your weight back on that water, and it holds you up. And you can completely go off duty. And I ask you again this evening, my friend, have you found that kind of love? Because it only comes from one place. It comes from a Nazarene carpenter turned rabbi, turned Savior, who went to a cross and said, "I cannot show you any more clearly how much I love you than to die on this cross for your sins." And like Brent did, and many others here, if one just simply receives that free gift of the death on the cross, we not only get eternity squared away, but for the first time, that love that will not let me go possesses our hearts. Have you found that love? Are you enjoying it? The second is in the issue of hunger. In the issue of hunger. And I'm going to suggest this. We hunger to make a difference in this world that cannot be erased or even diminished over time. In other words, we long to know that we made a difference in this world. That our footprints will not be erased by the tide of time. I've mentioned this before, but an illustration I read or came across several years ago. There's a woman in Beverly Hills who, when she died, she left millions of dollars to a hotel in Beverly Hills with only one request. And the request was this: that every day the hotel would page her. Just once a day. But every day the hotel would page her millions of dollars so that the name can be remembered. We long for that. We long to know that we've had impact. I think one of the fascinating issues or illustrations of this was Apple computers. In the early 80s, as it's just getting going, Steve Jobs, his cohorts, knew that the man they wanted to be CEO was John Sculley. And Sculley at the time, though, was the president, or way up in PepsiCo. He was set for life. Set for life. And Jobs kept coming after him, and he kept saying, "Why would I go to you? You guys are a startup company. Nobody knows anything about you. I'm essentially the president of PepsiCo. Why in the world would I go with you guys?" Kept coming after him. And Sculley himself recounts the lunch that changed his mind. And they were having lunch, and Jobs looked over him and said this: "Do you really want to spend the rest of your life selling sugar water? Or do you want to come change the world?" And Sculley said that. He was right. I am going to spend the rest of my life selling sugar water. Now, I don't know that he made that much of a better choice, but nonetheless, it's that longing for impact and significance that's going to always be there. It's not going anywhere. What's it characterized by? A couple of things. Number one, it's unique to the individual. We all want to know that we've been involved in something nobody else can do. We don't want to simply be part of the crowd. We don't want to just be one among many. If you listen to the inner yearnings of your heart that God placed within, He's saying, no, you're an individual. Be what you were meant to be. Or, as George Bernard Shaw put it, be yourself. Everybody else is already taken. They're saying, be yourself. Everybody else is already taken. Well, God has given something unique to every one of us. So, it's individual. Secondly, it resonates internally and passionately. We don't want to make a contribution to this world where we simply grit our teeth and make it day by day, and there's nothing in it that wakes us up in the morning or keeps us up at night. Don't you? Well, doesn't everybody long for something that sets them on fire? John Wesley was once asked the secret of his preaching. You know what he said? He said, I set myself on fire and people come to watch me burn. But he found what God had made him to do. And I submit to you, to every single person in this room, there is something that God has uniquely hardwired you to do that nobody else can step in and take your place. Nobody can be your understudy in life. Nobody can take your place. You have a song that nobody else can sing. You have a poem that nobody else can write. You have a niche that nobody else can fill. And when you connect with that, I promise you, there is a passion and there is a resonating. I have a friend who went through college, A&M, went off to Columbia, and he works with Bible translators as the person that really helps them with their computers when they crash. And not long ago, I was talking to him, and he was in Columbia, and he was up in the jungles, and there was a Bible translator whose computer had crashed, and so he's out there outside. He said he's working on it. There's mosquitoes, everything, everywhere. It could not be hotter, miserable conditions. And he said, Dwight, in the middle of it, I leaned back on my chair, and I stretched out my arms, and I said, this is what I was made to do. Couldn't it be more thrilled? He landed. Every one of us has that opportunity. And the final thing is this, that we want to know that it lasts eternally. If we're willing to go deep enough, if we're willing to go far enough down, we have to be honest with ourselves and say, you know what? I don't want to be remembered for 100 years. I don't want to be remembered for 1,000 years. I want to be remembered forever. Is that even possible? Is that even possible? One of the very, very first individuals in the Bible walked with the Lord and cost him his life. His name was Abel. But it says this, he being dead still speaks. And that's possible for every one of us. Every one of us. This is a hunger that's placed within all of us. Within all of us. Now, the first point I made in all this was that God's created us with God-sized longings in a rigged life so nothing on earth can fully satisfy it. In fact, let me add to you another illustration of this. Nick Nolte, in an interview with the LA Times, made this statement, if I can find it. Yes. There's one thing he's talking about his life, he says this. There's still one thing inside, and that's kind of a yearning. What that yearning is, I'm not totally sure, but whatever it is, it can't quite get quenched. I think it's a need, a seeking of completeness. That's one quality of life that is common to all of us. He's being honest. In fact, I find non-Christians are more honest with what's going inside of them, much of the time, than believers are. And it's for this very reason. Lewis pointed out that in the Christian world, often what is called contentment is really simply sanctified Buddhism. And what he means is this. In Buddhism, the great goal of life is nirvana. And nirvana is that state of peace and tranquility, not because all of your needs have been met, but because all of your desires have been annihilated. And that's the goal. It's just numb out completely. Get to the place that you just don't even care anymore. That's nirvana. But that, my friends, is not Christian contentment. In fact, let me just read to you exactly what Lewis said on this. It says, If there lurks in most modern minds the notion that to desire our own good and earnestly to hope for the enjoyment of it is a bad thing, I submit that this notion has crept in from Kant and the Stoics and is no part of the Christian faith. Indeed, if we consider the unblushing promises of reward and the staggering nature of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. Now listen to this. We are half-hearted creatures fooling around with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday by the sea. We are far too easily pleased. Christian contentment is taking all of our thirst and all of our hunger and diving headlong into the river of God and getting blind drunk on his love. And Christian contentment is taking all of our hunger and diving into the banquet table that he offers and eating till we can eat no more. And guess what? Sin loses its attractiveness when you're full. And that's the way God moves us away from the trinkets and the toys of this life. Secondly, we are born with unmanageable needs, which we seek to meet with manageable gods. I think this is very important. What do I mean by unmanageable needs? Simply what I've talked about. These longings, these passions are so strong that they're like an undercurrent in the ocean that is going to take us somewhere. It's going to take us somewhere. There's no way to get around it. Thirst. Do you remember the last time that you were really, really, really thirsty? I mean, really thirsty. If you've ever been that thirsty, you'll never forget it. For me, this is a really ironic kind of thing. But many, many years ago, when I was young and I was playing the circuit, I was playing a tournament in Mallorca, Spain. And Buddy and I went out to practice around noon, and we couldn't find any water anywhere. You couldn't drink it really from the tap in those days. There wasn't any bottled water around. There was really nothing to drink. And so we made the decision, surely we can make it for an hour and a half without drinking any water. And so we went ahead. And so we played for an hour and a half. It was hot. We sweated, but we made it through. And so we're done about 2 o'clock. But man, we're so thirsty. Can't wait to get to the first tienda to get some water. But we had made a strategically bad error. And maybe you could see it coming. 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Spain, there's not a tienda open. Those are the days of siesta. And I promise you, there was not a single store open. And I still remember going block after block after block, the thirst mounting and mounting and mounting. I have never been that thirsty in all my life. And finally we found the one store, and I can still remember just taking that water, pouring it up here, and just draining. And the interesting thing is, Mallorca is a beautiful island. It's a great place. But that's not what I remember about Mallorca. What I remember about Mallorca was the time I was the most thirsty I'd ever been in all my life. And I want to submit to you, it's no different in the soul spiritual realm. We're that thirsty. And it is going to take us somewhere. And the problem is this. We have unmanageable needs, but we want to have a manageable God that we can control to meet them. We want to stay in control. We're just not even aware of it. That's why George MacDonald made this daring statement, and I think he's exactly right. He said this: when a man knocks at a brothel, place of prostitution, he's really knocking for God. George MacDonald, great British writer, novelist, professor, but he's exactly right. When a man knocks at a brothel, that God-given longing he's taking in an illegitimate direction and trying to manage it through a manageable God. Or again, Billy Joel, perhaps you remember years ago a song called Piano Man. And one of the lyrics goes, there's an old man in the corner making love to his tonic and gin. That's an incredibly perceptive statement, especially for Billy Joel. But it is exactly right. It's exactly right. What he's doing is taking that longing, and alcohol, by the way, is a very manageable God. The great thing about alcohol is it's completely predictable. You know, after how many drinks, it starts to come through for you. That God will always make love to you. It will always make love to you. You don't have to treat it well. It will always make love to you. The problem is, it just can't get the job done that our souls are longing for. So, secondly, as it says here, we're born with unmanageable needs, and we seek to meet them through manageable gods. And then finally, all sin ultimately is taking a God-given longing and going in a God-absent direction. Jeremiah 2:13. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and have hewn out for themselves broken cisterns which cannot hold water. He said, my people are thirsty because I made them that way. God never condemns us for our thirst. He never ever does. What he condemns us for, or rebukes us for, is taking this God-given longing that he created so that we would slake our thirst in the fountains of living water. He says, but no, my people won't go there. They go in a God-absent direction. They hew out for themselves broken cisterns which cannot hold water. What are broken cisterns? A job, a spouse, pornography, drugs, alcohol, sport out of control. It can even be ministry. It can even look very, very respectable. But it's wherever we go to save ourselves from the terror of having to trust God alone. And Lewis again was right. He said, our problem is not trusting God. Our problem is trusting God alone. Our only. Because it's a risk. And if he doesn't come through, then what is our soul going to do? But there's a God who's just waiting and longing and coming after you and coming after me, saying, you know what? I can get the job done. I can get the job done. And I would just ask you this evening as we close up, have you found a purpose big enough? Have you found a love enough? Big enough? Have you found a purpose big enough? Have you found something that just so satisfies your soul that you can say, I know this is what I was made to do? When the eternal realities of the kingdom flow through you and me in the life of another person, that's what happens. Jesus said, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. There is a God. There is a God that is so unlike much of what you see in Christendom. And since I'm a pastor, I think I can say that. I wouldn't be surprised if many of you have been turned off to Christianity because of what I would call religiosity. And I'm so sorry. But the reason I went into the pastorate is when I began to read about the Jesus of the Bible, he was so different than anything I'd ever experienced in church that I said, you know what, people need to know about this. People need to know about this man. People need to know about this love that, as you see in the prodigal son, runs you down and grabs you tight and kisses you over and over and over and restores you. People need to know about a love like in Hosea that buys back the wayward wife and says, I'll love you again and again and again. I don't know where else you're going to go to get that kind of love, my friend, or that kind of purpose, or that kind of significance. But I'm telling you tonight that there is one who's waiting and saying, you know what, it's not an accident that you're here tonight. You didn't just come because you were invited. The God of the universe is stalking you. The God of the universe who sent his son to die on a cross for you is coming hard after you. And the question is, what will we do with him? Back in the 70s, we used to sing a song. Unfortunately, I won't sing it for you, but I'll give you the lyrics. Going like this. They say that you will never know until you walk up to this man and see the love of look in his eyes and feel the scars in his hand. And then if you can walk away knowing all he died to do, that's when I'll have to say, yes, he didn't die for you, but he did. And the continuing lyric. Anybody here want to live forever? Say I do. Anybody here want to walk on streets of gold? Say I do. Anybody here want a home with love forever? Say I do. Let's just bow our heads and pray and we'll be done. Let me just say, as you're sitting here and listening, and you honestly are feeling the tug of God on your heart, you could do right now, right where you sit, exactly what Brand did. exactly what I did when I was 17, exactly what many others have done. And that is just to simply receive a free gift. And that's all that's being asked of you tonight, is God is saying, I love you. I sent my son to die for you and for your sins. And if you'll simply receive this free gift, if you'll simply say yes to my offer, then I guarantee you eternity in heaven, and I'll come and live inside of you, and I will give you a love and a purpose that you've never found before. And honestly, all you need to do is say, I do. I do. Lord, thanks for tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. We'll see you